Fernando is not. We've had a couple of cancellations. Did you guys decide on a batting order? Did you autonomously self-organize yourself as panelists?
I mean, we got as far as the first two, deferring to Frank Emspak, the Wisconsin.
So Frank is number one.
Sam is
number two. Lee, and then Michael? Is that?
And that exhausts the...
we're exhausted.
Then we're exhausted? All right.
Okay.
What about John Flanders?
And then John.
Just briefly.
You're going to back to it, John?
Just briefly.
Famous last words in what form? Just briefly. So,
My case be true.
Bar, somebody's watch here. Somebody's got an old-fashioned brother chose the rescue. Thank you. My
You
name's...
got second, so you can really be fun.
I'm going to try to be. Sorry to be late. My name is Steve Early, and I wasn't. I'm going to be facilitating this discussion. As many of you know, the Letter Forum this year actually put out guidelines for facilitation of workshops, something that some of us have recommended for many years. And the purpose of these guidelines, you guys seen the guidelines? Oh, very good. Is to enforce time limits a little bit better so that when people come to sessions like this, they don't turn into mini plenaries where 2 hours are spent with the panelists making wonderful presentations of people who know stuff at any chance to talk. So, as chair, that is my only role here, and I did contribute to the great collection that others are going to be discussing, is to be a timekeeper. And since we have 5 folks, and we're getting started a little late, we're going to keep each of their initial presentations to 10 minutes or under, depending on the more discipline, and that will leave us with another hour or so for discussion. So, if you see me being a Grinch with a little piece of paper that I'm shoving under somebody's nose, that's for the purpose of enforcing time limits. And making sure there's time for everybody to participate in discussion at the end of the hour. So we're going to lead off, and I'm going to introduce people one at a time. LaBotz is another contributor to this great volume. So we're now up to 6. Dan, were you interested in speaking? Dan? Brother Dan? Are you interested in speaking too?
I usually talk. I listen, I say, but I can listen for a while. How's that?
Okay, well, this affects the time. Right?
Yes, I'm not
so
participating.
People's 10 minutes
let's hear more
just
from
went
Stuart.
to 8 or 9 if you're added to the list.
Better more from Stuart.
Okay.
Is that a
generous? All right, we're going to call on you first from the floor. All right, so you're back to 10 minutes, but it's a strict 10 minutes. Brother Frank Emspak is going to lead off. Frank, as many of you know, was a longtime union activist in the Boston area, a leader of the International Union of Electrical Workers at General Electric in Lynn, Massachusetts, a third-generation GE union troublemaker. He went on to an illustrious career as a labor educator at the School for Workers at the University of Wisconsin. And as you just heard from that pitch, he was making, not for the book, but for a CD. He has been a founder and a creative talent and fundraising force behind Workers Independent News. He's going to be talking about his contribution to the Wisconsin Uprising as a longtime resident of Madison and participant in the great events of a year ago. Brother Frank.
Hi, thank you, Steve. Hi.
You want to stand? Why don't you stand up?
Stand up.
Good suggestion. This will make it easier for me to pass the 1 minute note to him.
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking about this actually quite a bit because we've been doing forums in other places with this book and another book that another colleague of mine edited. And the problem is that, what do people know and what do people don't know about Wisconsin? So what I'd rather do is just say a couple of minutes about what I think happened, and then talk about what's been going on for the last year, which people may have less access to in terms of information, and poses to us in any kind of socialist or progressive movement a major challenge. That's how I would say. So year, around Valentine's Day, the Governor Walker announced he was going to destroy collective bargaining. He did so in a memo that came out Thursday night, so you could see it, in the hopes everybody would go home, and then he passed the legislation on Monday, Valentine's Day. That's what happened. He got elected in part, and that's something we want to consider, because in the election of 2010, mostly white working people in the state of Wisconsin did not vote because they voted about Obama and had a lackluster Democratic candidate who already agreed to many of the type of budget cuts and concessions as county executive in Milwaukee that the governor was proposing. So a lot of people said, what the hell is the difference? Well, we found out what the difference was, but the fact of the matter is that had he run on a platform perhaps fighting the governor, the incumbent governor now, he might have won. But in any event, the legislature also turned over again because of the low voter turnout, relatively speaking. Young people didn't vote and so forth. The Democratic Party, which was still in control of the state until December 31st, meets. It said the legislators meet, and they can ratify the state contracts. This is very important, which would have gone on for another year or so. The head of the Democratic Senate caucus, a guy named Russ Decker, who's been defeated, stands up and says, I resign as a Democratic leader, and walks out of the room, and no vote, or it's a vote, it's a tie vote. Hence, the collective bargaining agreements are not ratified. This is not Governor Walker. I think that's important to realize, because the immediate aftermath of that was, of course, fury against the Democrats as well as the government. 2 months pass. The governor says, I'm canceling the high-speed rail, or whatever rail it was, because I'm standing up. And then he comes out with what was a long-time plan, but in fact a secret. He did not run on the issue of recalls, and announces that this is going to get through the legislature on Monday. This is on a Friday. By that time, people were antsy. Over the weekend, the teaching assistants actually mobilized. They were going to go up to the state capitol anyway on Monday to fight for their budget, the university's budget, something the University of Wisconsin administration had declined to do, as they have accepted the notion of state located but not state supported. This is serious because it also disenfranchises most working people because they can't afford to go to school anymore in Madison. In any event, the TAs show up. On Thursday and Friday, as you may recall, in Egypt, there was a big upheaval. Our news service, as well as many others, covered it. And in fact, in Madison, because we have a big implantation on a variety of stations, people heard directly from our stuff from the president of the teachers union in Cairo, saying we're standing up, you two should, people should also, basically. And you saw signs on Monday, walk like an Egyptian. It was great. And that was because of Democracy Now! And the coverage we did. So that's marvelous. Well, the TAs decided that would stay overnight, much to everybody's shock. Theirs, mine, the entire media, who was ignoring this, except for progressive media, you should know. And then thousands of people began coming, uninvited, so to speak. It isn't like the TAs put out an announcement, or the labor put out an announcement. Nobody put out an announcement. The people said, hey, this is serious. And thousands of people began on their own to come to the state capitol. It wasn't until Wednesday, just 2 or 3 days later, that people of the trade union movement, still not most of the national or state leadership, said come to the Capitol. That didn't happen until 2 or 3 days later. The high school students walked out from 12 miles away in Stoughton. They came first, and that's a middle-class, working-class school district. It isn't the Madison liberals. The Madison kids came the next day because they probably felt left out. The school board canceled classes in Madison on Wednesday. So all the teachers came, and then teachers from all over the state came. But it wasn't until Thursday or Friday that you had any kind of national or regional leadership even saying anything, and even then, there was no direction. And so thousands and thousands of people said, we're not going to tolerate that. So I think the most important thing here is I want to talk about some of the other stuff that was not so nice. The most important thing here is that this was really an uprising. There's no question about that. It wouldn't have mattered at that point if anybody had told people to stay home or go away or do anything else. By Thursday, when it became clear clear that the governor was going to ram these things through no matter what, that's when the legislators left and went to Illinois. And to the point that we were talking about earlier, delaying the process so people could get themselves together a little bit. Now, the position of the labor movement, other than being fearful of having people on strike and everything else, they provided the financial resources to have food and the podiums and the electrical stuff and so on and so forth, which was important. The police, which is also important, except for the Capitol Police under the control of the father of the Assembly Speaker of the House leader, the two brothers, refused to do anything. The sheriffs that came down said, we don't know why we're here, and did everything possible to make themselves scarce. The city police said, we're busy elsewhere, 50,000 people downtown, they're busy someplace else. And the county sheriff said, we're not the palace guard, get somebody else. And so this was probably the first time in a long time that the force of law and order said, hey, we're busy. Okay, and this is actually pretty important because you then had based on last night, you had police with big T-shirts saying "Cops for Labor." So this was pretty wild, actually. And these were not just the activists. We were having breakfast someplace, and I bumped into some cops and said, "What are you guys doing here?" It's like, we're busy. It's right. I understand you're busy. Why now? They said, "We're not going up to the square. We're going to go look at some cops." They were serious about this. Okay. The basic thing that the labor movement said was, let's go back to the status quo ante. We want collective payback. We had a great time for the last 30 years, which is exactly what was said last Sunday or Saturday up there, 50,000 people. We want to go back. We have good relations with the state. We have good relations with everybody. We want the collective bargaining back to come back to the kind of situation we had in Wisconsin prior to Governor Walker. The problem with all this, anyway, this goes on. That's the basic ideological line. It hasn't changed since February. About 2 or 3 weeks into this, it was perfectly clear that demonstrations weren't going to make a difference. 150,000 people, doesn't matter. So none of this democracy business. Everybody finally understood that was gone. So to finish up. Seriously, the next thing that happens is somebody announces recalls. Recalls in Wisconsin go on without anybody in charge of anything based on the law. In any event, everybody cooperates on the recalls, all kinds of people. You got 1 million signatures for the governor, 1 million signatures for the lieutenant governor, another 250,000 signatures for each of the senators that are targeted. 3 of the elections were this summer, last summer we won 2. So the political system is still the same. Republicans in control. Now we have recall scheduled for the governor and 4 other senators. They're going to be June 5th. Governor has a 47% approval rating. In other words, going into this, we could lose. And the narrative is, go back to the status quo ante. My narrative, just so I can end, is this. If you don't have a ground game, if we don't do what the civil rights movement did, which is have people active in the work locations, in the street, the recall looks radical. So people are going to say, well, I don't know so much. If you have people mobilized, and we have that other wing, which Martin Luther King was very clear about, we're going to do our thing, President Johnson, we're going to do your thing, but we are not going to give up the struggle in the street in exchange for a promise on a piece of legislation. You do the legislation, and we'll see. In my opinion, and the opinion of many of the rank and file people there, that's where we have to go. That's not what's happening. It's in fact being opposed by everybody who is respectable. So, I mean, that's where we are today. Thank you.
That situation.
Buy the CD.
Really good job.
Hey, we want people to buy the book.
Buy the book.
350 pages to explain all this. I want to also mention that Stephanie Luce, who was scheduled to be with us, who's one of the empty chairs that are deaf in the family, unfortunately cannot come. On the West Coast, dealing with that. Mike Yates also sends his regrets. He did a great job editing this collection. Our next speaker, coming to us directly from the People's Republic of Vermont, Sam Mayfield, is not a contributor to the book, but she's going to do us one better. She is making a great documentary film about the Wisconsin Uprising. I don't know if that's going to be the title, but she's here to talk about what she saw and observed a year ago and about her work in progress.
Hello.
Hello.
It's really nice to see a room full of people that are interested in Wisconsin. Has anyone in the room, did anyone besides Frank and I go to Wisconsin? Were any of you there? And you all went for the movement to go check it out?
Me and a teacher over there from Wisconsin.
Oh, all right. So I do video work. I'm a video journalist and a videographer and an editor. And so in my other life, I'm not making this documentary. I'm shooting videos, usually related to social justice issues, and spinning stories out to progressive media outlets and websites and local community TV in Vermont. So when people started taking over the Capitol in Wisconsin, I was following the story very closely. And Vermont was having solidarity rallies at our state capitol and in Burlington. And I was shooting those rallies and feeding them to a media outlet that I've worked for in the past, The Uptake, they're out of Minnesota. And I had been sending them footage of the rallies that we were having because places all over the country were having these solidarity rallies. And so I gave them some video and they called and they said, would you go to Wisconsin and report for us, which is something I had done in the past. And so I said, okay. And I went and was expecting to go for 4 days. And I literally stayed for 7 months. I went for those 4 days, and then I stayed at that time for over a week, and then had to go home to Vermont. I had more work to do. Went home, raised some money, and then started this endeavor of making the documentary. In the meantime of making the documentary, I've also been continuing to turn out videos for Democracy Now! And for TowardFreedom.com and Free Speech TV. So the reason that I'm making this is because when I got to Wisconsin, I had been following the story from people who were there at the Capitol. They were sending out their own videos from inside the Capitol. People were doing reports from outside of the Capitol. And the mainstream media, not surprising to us in the room probably, they were just getting it wrong. And it was palpable that they were getting it wrong. But when I got to Wisconsin and I got on the ground, I checked into my hotel, I went straight to the Capitol, went straight into the Capitol, and it was definitely one of the most moving things I've ever seen. And it was very clear that this was a piece of history. American history was unfolding just right in front of me. And the thing that I think makes it so historical is that we were seeing people coming together across platforms that are not always together. So this movement brought people together across platforms like we haven't really seen. I haven't seen in my lifetime. The anti-globalization movement did a good job of bringing people together, but a lot of those folks were already politically engaged, or they were radical activists or something. This movement, we're talking about teachers and nurses and snowplow people and the people who are serving us in our communities. And so when I got there and started interviewing people on the street, nurses, firefighters, teachers, and they were expressing how disenchanted they were, it felt like an obligation to share their story, because I believe that when the people who serve us in our communities say they need something more and we're not listening and we're not doing something to help them so that they can sustain our lives, there's something grossly wrong. And so it felt like it needed to be documented, and it felt important to keep the camera rolling the whole time, because I knew that where I was, there were not these corporate cameras. And the corporate cameras did come in, and they did what they do so well, which is they swoop in, they get the really hot moments, and then they swoop out. They swoop in when Susan Sarandon's talking, and they swoop in when Michael Moore's talking. And I would be up on the risers filming these events that Frank was talking about, like 150,000 people. Freezing cold all day. And, I've staked out my space. The other media a few alternative outlets are right there. And then the big cameras come in, literally, the Fox News cameras come in onto the riser platforms with these huge cameras. I've never been beaten by another camera before until the Fox News guy comes in, hits the back of my head, he like shakes the whole platform, and so they swoop in, they disrupt, and then they leave. And then they give us these stories with palm trees in the videos that are just completely out of touch with what's happening and with what the people are actually talking about. So I think it makes sense to show the trailer right now.
Sounds good.
How are we doing for time?
Here's
You
the-
have
Is that the-
This is projector use.
That's the screen.
4 minutes.
No, okay, you can.
Yeah, but
if
don't you want
somebody
to drop
could,
the screen?
If somebody can get the lights, you push that bottom button down there. Yep.
This really happened.
This thing.
I'm in the room, and I make all
Is that
technology.
G switch?
I have anti-technology calling like this. Just amazing. Crossing my fingers.
Maybe that switch was
That's
supposed
that.
to be up there.
That's it.
Oh, you know what? I think that these things are touching the keyboard.
Well, while she's doing that, the allusion to the palm trees was this. In Fox News, in the background, in January in Wisconsin, you saw palm trees. And so most people realized that it was a total fraud, even the people who would normally be appreciative of Fox.
Because they showed this video, and the people in Wisconsin, you know, they're staying on top of the videos that are being shown on corporate media about them. And the people in Wisconsin watched the video, and they were like, "That's not us. Wait a minute. Those are palm trees." And then the great thing, the beautiful thing, because it's such an animated movement, is that the people of Wisconsin, in response, they show up to the Capitol with inflatable palm trees everywhere. It's amazing. I mean,
Which
just
most
so
Wisconsin
animated.
They're wonderful signs.
Okay, so here's this trailer, and I just had a successful Kickstarter campaign, I'm happy to say, and just raised $41,000 to bring the film into the next level of post-production.
So you're officially in post-production now.
I am officially in post-production. I'm no longer shooting. I'll go back for the recall for sure and pick up some extra interviews to fill in the blanks.
The eyes of the nation were on the political firestorm in Wisconsin late last winter when Republican Governor Scott Walker took on the labor union representing the state's public employees.
What we're doing here in Wisconsin is leading the way with a better alternative.
Governor, we can hear thousands of people in the halls screaming, shame, shame, shame. We can hear that in your office right now. Can you respond to that?
Sure. I've said every day since I have distance in my area that the protesters are here around the Capitol, at least those from Wisconsin. I'm increasing there more and more from other states, but those from Wisconsin have every right to be there.
This is a total attack. This is the killing of a generation of people. We encouraged our kids to go into these honorable professions, and now they're getting screwed for it.
We're not going to let just one man and one set of politicians come in and change everything that we've been working on for so long.
It's a terrible
assault on labor or work in general. If this goes through and it starts there, it's just the beginning of the end for any of the unions across the states.
Walking away from teaching is like saying, don't be who you are anymore. And, you know, that's not a fair thing to say to somebody. I don't think that's fair at all.
It's not just a union fight, but it's a middle class fight. And we need all hands working, as we say in the fire service.
We've had a complete breakdown of the democratic process here in Wisconsin.
It's the system that needs to be recalled. It's the system that needs to be taken down and transformed. It's the system that needs to be abandoned.
Their vision of democracy is very, very different than ours, and people really have to pay attention to this and start bird-dogging these institutions, these legislators, these corporations, and taking back their democracy.
You have aroused a sleeping giant known as the working people of the United States of America. Madison is only the beginning.
How would help pay for it? Are you going to pass it out, or tell people how they can help contribute?
I can, I should put my business cards with my website.
How about up on the blackboard?
Oh, yep, I should do that.
Trying to help with the fundraising here.
Yep.
No time to be shy.
You gotta not be shy.
No, I know. So I'll put my blog up there. I think I'm going to pass these cards around. That's what I'm going to do instead.
Great.
And there's a place to donate on my blog, and then you can also send me an email if you want.
Terrific work. Thank you again, Sam, for showing us that piece of it. Estimated time of finishing the project?
The timeline for it, I hope to have a rough cut by the end of the summer, and I'd really like to have it out in October in time for the November 2012 elections.
Great.
Can't get it out in time for the recall election in June, Frank. Nope, I'm just starting to hit it.
Okay, side conversation.
You're sure you don't want to pass the hat?
No, let's pass the hat.
All right, let's pass the hat.
Great idea. We can pass the hat.
All right, our next speaker, moving things right along here, is Brother Lee Sustar, who has
cards in there.
one of the best chapters in the book about who were the leaders in this great popular upsurge. Brother Lee is a member of the National Writers Union, who's affiliated with the Auto Workers. He's the labor editor for Socialist Worker, frequent contributor to International Socialist Review, and one of the best labor journalists working in the country today. Lee.
Compliment, but there's probably about 5 of us, so unfortunately. That was a terrific film, and it really evokes a whole flood of memories, and I can't wait to see it. It's really important that it's being documented this way, somebody who has a point of view that you have. So I really appreciate that work. And I think what that film captured for me was that the most revolutionary thing for me, forgive me if you heard me say this before, because I say it all the time, but you saw the spectacle of the 3 tiers of people in the Capitol and the deafening chants and so forth. And literally, the crowd communicating by chants, and that was all fantastic, great spectacle, 100,000 people. But it really was turning to the person next to you and having a conversation and realizing that your problems weren't the result of your bad luck or your bad choices. But there was a system. There were political forces. There was the economy. And the other thing about it was that after people getting just hammered relentlessly for years, feeling very powerless at the point of production, discovered themselves as a movement, as a labor movement, as a broader working class movement. So it's by no means just union members there. There's all kinds of people. I don't have time to go into all the anecdotes there. But I think if you want to understand why there was this great groundswell of support from private sector unions, you just have to look at the kind of prehistory of this. And it's really awful. I mean, Wisconsin's a big enough state that you can kind of look at the whole thing and get a sense of the national trends and what they've meant. you had the 07 contracts for the auto workers, which implemented wage cuts in Delphi and two-tier and the GM plant in Janesville, which then subsequently closed. That then set a downward accelerator on industrial wages. So then you had, in industry, you had wage cuts and or permanent, multi-year wage freezes, permanent two-tier permanent contracts at Mercury Marine, Outboard Motors, at Harley-Davidson, and then Kohler and Sub-Zero, just right up to when Walker came into office. Woodman's, nominally employee-owned grocery chain, had its union wiped out, derecognized. Tyson, huge profitable company, profitable plant, decided that, given aftermath of the 80s struggles, that meatpacking wages had been cut down, it was time to cut the price of plant, and they ran that through the strike. So, and then of course you had 20% or more unemployment in the building trades industry as a result of the housing bubble collapse. So when the movement came, I think Frank really described it there. I happened to be there. I got a phone call from a comrade who was there, and they said, we called this, and I knew about the grad students going in, and then there was a first demonstration. They said, this is different. We've got people, we've never had anything like this before. And I got it, and got in the car, and went there, and was able to spend, a little over half the time of the public driving back and forth. Was able to, I hope, contribute some of the reporting at the time, coming out there. So I really want to talk about some of the basic points coming out of this for me. And I think the first thing is about the nature of, the working class exists. We are a movement. The idea that working class has disappeared and labor is relevant. We saw that it was a palpable, inescapable fact. And then, of course, that's resonated through the Occupy movement nationally. That was one of the best things about Occupy, that people had a taste of what was there in Wisconsin. If not as a concentrated labor-centric form, nevertheless got the sense of it. The second point is that the power of labor, while the demonstrations were great, the power wasn't from the street. It was from the plant production. It was from the teachers sitting out, and Frank went through the routine of it. I mean, the unions called the action statewide because it was going to happen. It was already happening. And Mary Bell, the president of Wisconsin Education Association Council, had actually been like her counterpart in AFL, Marty Field, offering money for just beginning. Yeah, we'll take all the economic cuts you want. Just give us our collective bargaining. But then when she saw what was happening, she stepped on the accelerator and basically made it official what had been an unofficial set of actions. Randy Weingarten, the president of the AFT, flew directly from a labor management cooperation conference in Denver with the Department of Education, sitting there with Arnie Duncan, directly to Madison, and then she had to buck up the TAA and told them, no, you have to stay out on strike. We're keeping this going. So they understood what was happening, and really at this point, it's the whole contradictory role of the labor officialdom, the labor bureaucracy. On the one hand, the material support that Frank described, kind of stepping on the accelerator at key moments, but at the same time containing and limiting struggle. Because the AFSCME slogan was, "It's not about the money." Now that's pretty hard to swallow if you make $20,000 a year in food service in the University of Wisconsin, when you're going to be $1,500 at least, depending on what healthcare plan you have. That was a big hit, and right away it squandered an opportunity to have a wider working class approach. There was all kinds of horrible things in the budget repair bill, targeting workers of color in particular, and rather than seek out those allies and make that forefront of labor struggle, it was very contained. I mean, the speeches would often make reference to it in a big sort of way. But the basic slogan was, as Frank said, go back to status quo ante, only this time, in terms of collective bargaining, but we'll take the hit on health care and on pensions. And so, I think that they were looking for a deal though that really wasn't available, and that's the next point I want to make, which is about the qualitative difference in the employer's defense at this time. I mean, it's been continuous, but there's a qualitative change, which is, I think, this. In the early 1980s, employers in private industry could say, take your cuts now, and when we're more competitive with Japanese automakers, you get it back. And there's some degree of truth to that, in the sense that although a lot of workers' real wages have been frozen over pay cuts since 1981, compensation could go up based on overtime or different kinds of profit sharing plans that exist in different contracts. But this is different. This is a permanent cut. This is it. The family wage job, the so-called middle class American worker job, that's gone. The 2 tiers will be permanent, and we're going to play off against each other, and that's going to be And in terms of the public sector, nobody needs to convincing on this. I mean, the idea that, you know, in the 80s or 90s, well, we'll take lower wages now in exchange for a better pension in the future. Well, guess what? The pensions are underfunded. We're going to eviscerate them. And this is really part of the program of capital in this crisis, which is a deep and permanent cut in the standard of living of workers to make U.S. workers more competitive with China. And I have kind of to say that out loud because a few years ago it seemed, you know, very difficult to absorb. But when you think about Chinese wages rising, transport costs, and so forth, you know, it's close enough that there's a trickle of manufacturing jobs back in insourcing. I think that's a whole other discussion about whether that's really going to be the basis of U.S. economic revival. I have my doubts. But that's it's clearly you know, it's within shouting distance. That's what they're going for. So the status quo ante is not available, whether in the public sector or the private sector. We're going, and that's posed the question for the union leadership of this. You can put it all on the line now, and everything is going to be on the line. Your whole institution, your whole money, everything. Or you can take the hit and bleed to death slowly. That's it. And so the union, I think Kim Moody had a great quote in an article he wrote several years ago about how a fading clone of the social vision was passed down by international executive board to international executive board over decades. So to make the point that there's such a rift between the institutional self-preservation perspective of the union leadership versus what's happening in the rank and file, which has only grown more acute as the employer's offensive has accelerated. And the idea of, and these are real questions. I mean, it's not, you know, oh, let's all have the general strike of ask me, you know, in Wisconsin. Well, okay, then the union might not exist the next day, right? Everything might. So that's what time it is. But if you don't do that, guess what? You know, you have 10, 12% recommit, as they calling it's a euphemism for the signing up to pay dues again in Wisconsin. It's just that's evisceration as well. We actually off half the staff. It's horrible. You can't overstate the scale of that defeat. So that was also the threat in Longview, although employers backed down on that as well. Like, we're going to wipe you out, or, you know, and in the end, mobilization by workers prevented that. But that's what time is. That's what's happening in the industry and in the public sector today. And of course, the labor unions want the Democratic Party. Want the
That's what time it is.
Okay. They want a electoral solution to the recall. And I don't even have. Well, I'm not going to say so much about that. It's a dead end. Frank can explain why. The leading Democratic candidate, the former executive of the county around Madison, brags about her hardline and employer negotiations. He went through why Barrett was a terrible candidate and why Walker was able to win. Democrats is a bipartisan thing. I'm from Illinois. The same things are happening. It's Democratic top to bottom. The only difference is you can keep your collective bargaining rights because they still want your money at election time. That's really, it's a completely bipartisan thing. And the last point, the last few segments is about the role of the left. There was a different coalition called Kill the Whole Bill. Later became Wisconsin Resist. Jan Rudolph over here from the National Nurses United was instrumental to that. It was a layer of people. Eric Cobb, who was then head of the Building Trades Council of Madison, a number of people with long-standing connections to labor movement, groups of rank and filers. Had a good meeting at the Labor Temple, which drew together basically on the platform of no concessions. Roseanne DeMar's excellent statement that came out was turned into a flyer. There's a no concessions contingent, following the marches. And then after the labor leadership abandoned the field, you know, sorry we don't have anything more to say, the sound system was there. This coalition organized a demonstration on no concessions on the theme of the New Orleans Jazz March, about 7,000. And you know, the problem was it was not big enough to actually move it. There was kind of a missing gear. There was general strike idea very popular, but there wasn't there wasn't a layer of people organized in the workplaces in the way that Frank was describing to make that happen. In fact, when I would talk to people as a journalist, say, well, what do you think should happen next? It admits, you know, tension and anxiety because they couldn't quite imagine taking this thing back into the workplace because of the obvious risks involved. And they had to deal with unions, and they felt powerful on the street, but they knew that something was waning, particularly after the teachers had gone back to work. And that's the lesson that we have to take to heart, is that there's no real shortcuts to this. We actually have to do brass tacks organizing, and Occupy Labor, you know, we can talk about this more later. I think Occupy Labor has shown the possibility of doing that nationally. So the outreach, it's been uneven, lots of different experiences, but it's been very critical, I think, in laying the basis for a new labor left in which people aren't in unions, trying to get into unions, and people in unions trying to be fed up with unions not doing anything, can find each other, finally come out of their isolation, begin to knit together a movement. I think we can see that this event.
Okay, we're just 2 speakers away from throwing this open to everybody. Our next presenter is no slouch in the audiovisual department himself, Brother Michael Zweig. Many of you know him from his years of activism in U.S. labor against the war. He actually has a day job. He's a professor of economics at SUNY Stony Brook, director of the Center for the Study of Working Class Life there. And Michael's chapter in the book, fittingly enough, is about the issue of U.S. war spending, our overall federal budget priorities, and what the connection is between those things and the budget crisis, real or imagined, in Wisconsin. Hello, Michael.
Hey. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. The title of the chapter that I have in the book is Beyond Wisconsin, Seeking New Priorities as Labor Challenges War. So the thing in Wisconsin had two elements there that I think draw into this discussion. Number one, the international solidarity, the connection between what was going on in Wisconsin, what was going on in Tunisia and in Egypt at the time, cannot be underestimated. And I think that the presence of pizzas at the Capitol bought by people who were sending money from Egypt was a concrete manifestation of that. And I don't know how often it happened, but it didn't have to happen more than once for people to get the point.
Huge,
right? And I'll come back to that in the international thing shortly. And then there was, of course, the budget question. Now, the emptiness of the budget rhetoric in Wisconsin was especially egregious because they were going to get $140 million in concessions from the unions they were looking for, having just given exactly $140 million in tax breaks to the big corporations and rich people in Wisconsin. Not 3 weeks before, they were coming in here saying there's no money, there's no money. So the emptiness of the no money crowd was something that was very much there, and it became obvious pretty quickly that this was not about money, it was about destroying collective bargaining. But nonetheless, it was presented in the country as a money question. There's no money. And we face that in New York, it's in Utah, it's all around the country. There are these enormous budget deficits, and it's just, as Joe Scarborough said one morning when he was talking about this, it's just arithmetic. There's no ideology here. So it's very important to address the question of money and this idea that there is no money. In U.S. Labor Against the War, which is an organization of about 200 central labor councils, union locals, state federations, including the Wisconsin Fed, the Vermont Fed, and others around the country. This is an organization that began in the run-up to the Iraq War in 2003. It developed an anti-war movement within the labor movement and then brought the labor movement with workers' concerns into the broader peace movement. That's what we've been trying to do. And I think what we see in Wisconsin is that this claim that there is no money requires us to challenge not only we should tax the rich, but what's going on with all this money going to Afghanistan and Iraq? The war in Iraq is not over, or at least our footprint in Iraq with billions of dollars going there every year, that's not ended. So what we're doing in U.S. Labor Against the War is trying to find ways to carry the message that we don't believe that there's no money. Of course there's money. The question is, what kind of a country are we? What kind of priorities do we have that are going to call upon us to move the money from war and from what the AFL-CIO National Executive Council recently called a militarized foreign policy. I think a wonderful formulation, a very nice little expression, which is the words of the National Executive Council of the AFL-CIO. They said in their discussion in August about their jobs program, they had a whole jobs program, and then they said in that same statement, nothing in this agenda can be accomplished until we end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and end the American militarized foreign policy and take a new direction. That's the AFL-CIO National Executive Council, and that happened because there was this, just as in Wisconsin, an upsurge from the bottom up. In the labor movement over the last 9 years, a bottom-up move for new priorities and to change the character of the country. My own union, which is a big AFT local representing 35,000 people in the State University of New York, is a charter member of U.S. Labor Against the War. And we've done a lot of educational work, a lot of activity in our communities, the union with the communities, trying to develop this theme and trying to develop coalitions more recently to address the need for new priorities. And there is something called the New Priorities Network. New Priorities Network.org, I believe it is, that I will ask you to go take a look at. The problem here for the labor movement is to address the basic question, what kind of a country are we? This is not just a question of another nickel or another dollar in a paycheck. And if the labor movement takes this challenge that we now have as a challenge to organize shop by shop, a challenge to organize nickel by nickel, it is bound to fail. It will fail. The only way in which we can embed those immediate economic demands is with a broader vision in the context of a broader social movement that challenges the country for power at in every dimension. That is what we have got to do. And that is what U.S. Labor Against the War is trying to do. Now, to come back to the international solidarity piece of this, one of the things that we did in U.S. law over the years to build our own organization is to bring Iraqi workers to the United States. We had 3 tours in 2005, 2007, and in 2009, where we brought the leaders of the Iraqi trade union movement to the United States and introduced them around the country to American workers and to American union leaders. And it was a profound experience. I took a bunch of Iraqis up to meet Mike Mulgrew, who's the president of UFT in New York City, and he ended up writing a check for $2,000 to support, out of his union, to support the Iraqi labor movement through U.S. Labor Against the War because of the power of those people who are not the enemy or the mullahs. They are workers, like people here. And what we found was not only are they just human beings and workers, but they're dealing with the same kind of issues as we're dealing with. The one law that the U.S. kept on the books in Iraq when we blew away the Baathists and the Saddam regime and all that stuff, we kept one law on the books, which was the law that Saddam put down in 1987 that made unions in the public sector illegal. That was a keeper. Well, unions in the public sector in North Carolina are also illegal, or effectively illegal. They have no legal protection. The same thing is going on now in Indiana. The same thing is going on in the challenges all around the country. That's not something that's just going on here. It's going on there. And the basis of unity, the basis of understanding that our situation is intimately linked with their situation is something that these tours and these international solidarity moments have been very important in promoting. The same thing on issues of privatization. Iraqi unions are trying to defend the Iraqi oil fields and the rest of Iraqis, of the Iraqi infrastructure and economic resources from being privatized. Well, what are we doing? It's the same story about privatization in the United States, and it's the same economic forces that are behind it here and there. So that when we look at what is going on in Wisconsin, and what are the lessons for struggle that we take out of that, and what should the labor movement take out of that, among other things, is this notion of international solidarity and the kind of new priorities that we have to have in order to resolve these problems, which are actually budget problems as well as an ideological attack on the labor movement, whether they talk about it directly as collective bargaining or not, whether they want our dues money or not. That's the general fight that we're in, and that's what U.S. Labor Against the War is trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what Donald Goodman over here from our union is trying to do from UPulse. UUP is in the House, and a number of you are, I think, also in that work. If anybody wants to talk about this through U.S. law, there's another session at 3 o'clock this afternoon, the New Priorities session, that I invite you to. We can continue it there. And if your local is interested, or you're interested in building that work in your local, I'm here, Tom Gogan, who's a national staff person for U.S. Law, is in the house. So please do carry this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Michael brought more people to this session than Sam did. I see all these Vermonters here. All right, we have one more speaker, the real organizer of this panel, a native of the great state of Vermont, John Flanders. He's been a railroad machinist for many years in Albany, former president of his IAM local, longtime activist in the Troy Labor Council, labor solidarity activity in the Albany-Troy area, also very active in Railroad Workers United, a national organization of rank and file activists in the various rail unions. John's wonderful contribution to this monthly review press book is a case study in Wisconsin-inspired and influenced shop floor militancy in a IUE CWA local, manufacturing plant local up in his neck of the woods in Waterford, New York. Brother John.
Well, one of the things I'm sorry we neglected to do is to bring copies of the book up here for sale. So I'll pass one around, and you can buy it, and we'll give the money to Sam.
It's on sale downstairs.
At the monthly review table. They have a big table. It's down there in quantity. Go buy it.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. That's an oversight. I'm not going to go into great detail about the Momentum situation. I'll just briefly summarize that this was a case of a former GE plant, which was bought out by a private equity firm, Apollo Management, that suffered what is now happening. Seems like every day you hear another story about wages being cut in half, like, for example, in Canada, the Caterpillar plant. That happened to them around 2008, where management unilaterally cut their production workers' salaries by up to 50%. And this is a plant, upstate New York, white male workers, a lot of them making $30 an hour, even more, old GE, old line GE, kind of complacent and it's asleep, basically, as characterized by the current president. And it was a huge shock. And as a result, they launched a struggle through the National Labor Relations Board, picket lines. We had a big meeting where Steve addressed where the whole labor community and basically the activists in the Detroit Capital District area came out. Their contract ended up with, and here this is an example of what we saw in Wisconsin, we're seeing everywhere else. Their contract, despite the fact that they voted it down, their contract passed because included in the bargaining for the contract were locals not related to them who didn't suffer the cuts, and they sweep through a ratification. And with a collusion, in my opinion, and many of the people in the locals' opinion of international leadership, who never once showed up on site for any of the activities, picket lines, or anything else that went on as this fight unfolded. They were able to have the satisfaction about, January 2011, of a successful grievance strike where in the middle of January, when things were freezing cold, they shut the plant down for 2 or 3 days, and the workers got a measure of revenge out of that. And as a result of all the fight that they have put up, the latest development is that there's been almost a complete cleaning house of management. It sounded a little bit like what happened at Temple University. We heard in that previous forum I just came from on the healthcare thing, and there's a new CEO who came in and was pledging to work with the union, blah, blah, blah. We'll see what that really happens. But it does indicate, at least to the union leadership, I can't speak for the rank and file, there's always differences, of course, that the battle that they did put up had some results. They're feeling fairly good about that. It doesn't change the fact that the wages were cut or anything else. So that's what I have to say about that. I think read the chapter. I can report also that in terms of book sales, the local so far has bought 40 copies of the book. so they're pretty happy with their story being told. And we were happy to sell them as many copies as they want. And I do encourage you to buy the book. There's a lot of good information in this book. I mean, some really, really good contributions. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, John, and thank you again for putting this together. Okay, so real quick, here's the ground rules. If people could identify themselves when they speak, please try to keep the question or the intervention short. I'm going to keep a list of people's hands, so I see. I'm going to alternate between men and women, even though this is predominantly a male audience. And clearly we can't have 5 responses to every question. So, you know, if you want to direct your remark to a particular person on the panel, please do, but I'm going to err on the side of hearing from people in the audience, because we only have about 40 minutes left. Okay, so we have hands up already. Yes, the brother here in the glasses.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say to Professor Emspak is go Big Red.
Could you say who you are?
My name is Robert Wright. I used to teach with Frank at the University of Wisconsin School for Workers. But I hope people get a chance to talk to Frank after this session if you don't get your questions in, because he's been a mainstay of labor education and the labor movement out in Wisconsin for years. He has labor leadership pulls their hair out, whereas the rank and file love him. He's done a lot of great things out in Wisconsin, and to be quite frank, I left Wisconsin a number of years ago. But I was not surprised by what happened in Wisconsin because I knew down in the gut Frank was involved in it. So I'd like Frank to talk a little bit about how the rank and file interacted with the various forces out in Wisconsin, because they were, I see, a real driving force in what was going on out there.
Well, I think what Robert is saying is this. You had really an upheaval from below. I'm not sure that Randy was out there to buck up the TAA as much as get a lecture from them. But the fact of the matter is that it was people from below, many of them shop stewards, many of them union activists. But the other thing that happened is that their friends came. You see, and so we don't have 150,000 trade unionists, you know, within 5 miles of Madison, Wisconsin. When you went through the crowd, probably 2/3 of the people were not in unions, although almost everybody said they wanted to be in one. And so the big thing, and I think this gets back to where the rank and file was and where the leadership was, if we had in place what I would call serious leadership, or the table there even, sign up for a union.
That's right.
That never happened.
An organizing campaign,
That
not
never
a default
happened.
campaign.
That never happened the entire time. You know, and although you had tremendous numbers of people coming in the private sector units, like the Boilermakers from Manitowoc, who just lost a strike, and other people from all over the place, coming down almost without their international in many cases. So it was a rank and file driven operation, and I think that's what happened. I think it came because the places that were most effective were the places that had an active stewards body. When you, again, interviewed people, the local president would be there. We're talking about small locals, so often he was the chief steward or she was the chief steward. So it's where you had that infrastructure in the labor movement that brought out people. But I think that, you know, we're certainly under attack, and I just want to emphasize, we're spending $40 million last year on the recalls for the Senate. Okay? So a number of people said, how much are we spending on internal organizing? How are we going to sustain this? Are we just going to people and saying, give us money for dues, we have our handout, or do we have a handout to help people? You know, do we take a position that the union will only represent those who pay dues? When our dues are taken away, so you have to pay by hand, you know? Or do we say we'll take positions that represent everybody? And I say this from experience. When we tried to organize without collective bargaining our university faculty academic staff union, all 300 of us out of 7,000 in Madison, we forced changes on the university because we took universal positions. You will not be fired on the day you're hired to get past your waiting period, things like that. And that's the thing that's going on now that could be done, and the challenge we face.
Okay, you're on the list, but the sister is next.
General National versus United, spent quite a bit of time in Wisconsin.
I think that labor is really in danger of missing an opportunity here in terms of a sea change in climate, essentially. Right? Decades and decades of a declining labor movement, and now there's a breath of fresh air and an ability to actually capture the hearts and minds of working class people across the country. Despite, and I think people are willing to forgive the problems that labor has had up until this point recently if labor makes a shift now. But I think we're in danger of missing the shift, right? Because they've really drawn the wrong conclusions. They are all about elections, and therefore they're all about polling to gauge where you are in the moment. If you look at a poll, polls reflect what happened before, not what's possible now. So they're forever trailing behind what's just happened. And so they got ahead in terms of offering concessions up front as a PR strategy, because they believe, based on their polling, right, that otherwise people would turn against labor and the situation wouldn't back collective bargaining rights. So they said, we'll give you the concessions up front, shared sacrifice, right? We're part of the problem, absolutely mea culpa. Just let us keep our collective bargaining rights. And despite that, there was an uprising, right, of the working class who didn't want, who actually saw an opportunity, was inspired by what was happening. I think the teachers were essential in catalyzing that. But the AFL-CIO has still drawn the conclusion that the reason that Wisconsin happened was because they made concessions up front and therefore got ahead on the PR strategy. Right? But despite that, it doesn't matter, because I think Wisconsin led to Occupy. Right? I think that the lessons of Wisconsin, i.e. we set the bar so low and so defensive despite an uprising, right, that a victory is no longer a victory, and we end up in what is, I think, a significant defeat in Wisconsin, at least for right now. Despite that, there was a shift towards blaming the cause of the problem, which is Wall Street. Right? Occupy drew that conclusion, and I don't think that would have happened without Wisconsin. So I think when we look historically back at this, we're going to say, first the Arab Spring, then Wisconsin, then Occupy. I don't know what the next thing is, but I hope that we make the shift and actually shift towards industrial action, not just street action in terms of Occupy, but actually building break-and-fall capacity in the unions, because I believe that's really where the power is, to shut down things and make it impossible to ignore the way they're going to ignore 150,000 people on the Capitol.
Okay, brother in the blue t-shirt, green hat. Travis, did you have your hand up? Okay.
My name's Ethan Cummings, and I am a teacher at Nicolay College, and I live in Wisconsin, in Rhineland, in northern Wisconsin.
Could you speak a little louder?
Yeah, my name's Ethan Cummings. I teach at Nicolay Area Technical College. I'm a sociology teacher. It's 220 miles north of Madison in the woods. And it's a poor working class area. And last week, I just handed in my forced resignation. I'm a casualty of Governor Walker. And I thought I would relate just a few things about my story that I think are relevant. I was at all the protests. I took that first bus on Wednesday, and after that I started driving to Madison weekends, the 225 miles each way. I was at the Capitol every day. I camped out in Walkerville in June in a tent. And I would attest to what Frank said about it being an amazing experience in the sense that you would turn, it was one of those amazing changes of consciousness where you really felt like another world was possible. You would talk to people in ways that you wouldn't normally talk to them. I found myself calling up strangers and asking them if I could crash at their house, and they would say yes, and we would have these amazing talks. It was an amazing experience. But on, I think it was February 27th, I was in the building, and there was planned civil disobedience at the Capitol, and they said form affinity groups. And I was with a friend of mine, and we did. And we were all set to stay there, and then somebody said, go home. And everybody went home, and it never happened again. And I guess I've heard all the rumors that I believe that it was the union leadership that essentially quashed the civil disobedience, which I really believe should have happened. You had over 100,000 people, and what did you do? Nothing, Now, in my case, I went home, I worked, they ran our state senator in a conservative district. He was one of the ones that was supposed to be recalled. He ran against this Tea Party woman, and we worked for him, and he won. I worked in the Walker recall. But let me just quickly, I know we're short on time, but just say a couple of things.
Yeah, we have a long list of people who like.
All right, my story is this. The president of my college is an Obama Democrat. She used to be the head of the Department of Public Education in Wisconsin under Doyle, the Democrat. She got up one day at a meeting and said that she was taking away. We have a thing where we can convert unused sick time into health insurance. I had $105,000 of saved health insurance. She said that if you were Medicare age and you didn't retire, you were going to lose that benefit. And it was a very successful strategy to get, and they're doing this in the K through 12s too, to get thousands of people to retire because they're going to go into an unknown environment with no union. Walker won in the short run. And it's important to realize that. He crushed AFSCME, he crushed the teachers union. The main organizer of our union, I used to be president of the union, looked at me and said, there's no union. So I was forced to retire because I didn't want to lose $105,000 and keep my job or I could be fired the next day. I tried to get my union to take the legal case because I believe it's age discrimination. They would not do it. Okay, I couldn't even get to talk to an attorney at the union. So I'm in a situation where I'm going to have to try to get a class action to sue them for age discrimination, which affects thousands of teachers who are being bribed to go out the door, and it's been very successful. Now, as far as my, let me just say just one or two things. Mary Bell makes $175,000.
No.
Okay.
Right, we have a list, and there's 4 or 5 other, really appreciate this report from the front line.
Well, I guess I would just say that a lot of the people speaking are not from Wisconsin.
Well, that was not a qualification for coming to the session. And there are non-Wisconsinites who are on the list.
Okay.
We're going to respect the rules, the ground rules. Okay, brother? We all agreed on that. All right, now here's the batting order. We have the sister here who is next. And Travis had his hand up. And the brother here in the blue union jacket, then Brother LaBotz, who kindly agreed not to be initial presenter, even though he contributed to the book. Any other hands? The brother here, the sister there. Okay, yes.
My name's Donna Goodman. I'm from UUP in Repulse, New York, and I would like to address...
Could you either speak up or talk louder?
Yeah, I would like to address the labor fights back part of the panel and ask the panelists what they think of the AFL-CIO's very early endorsement of President Obama, as well as the overall teachers union, which I belong to, AFT. We were talking about electoral strategies. The panelists were mentioning the recall as an electoral strategy, but certainly not enough. So what do we think in that context of this early endorsement, which I think maybe was leadership-led and not rank and file? I could be mistaken. I know that I wasn't consulted, so what do folks think about that?
Maybe we should get the other questions rather than just have one back and forth.
Well, the 5 other questions are going to be on many other different topics. How about somebody answer real quick? Independent political action? Anybody?
Why negotiate against yourself? That's my answer on the endorsement. Don't negotiate against yourself. We all learned that when we're stewards. That's what the AFL-CIO did. They negotiated against themselves and then endorsed Obama.
Okay. Anybody else on the political question? What?
I mean, it was totally predictable. I mean, Trump gave his speech a few months ago saying, well, we're going to hold people accountable. And there's this idea that we're going to create our own independent infrastructure. When I interviewed Trump about it at the May Day March in Milwaukee, he made it sound like he was in favor of the Labor Party. So they had that spin, but it's now garden variety. We have to stop the horrible threat. And with Romney being driven to the right so much on all questions, especially bashing unions, it's the usual blackmail tactic, which I think is only going to... Doing this over and over again has not stopped the drift to the right, and that's the argument you have to make.
Okay, Brother Trump.
Yes, Stephen from Vermont. I hope we can reflect on a new possibility for mass action. The uprising was unexpected, I believe. Occupy was unanticipated. We've got a situation now, I think actually gives people who are otherwise demoralized in the workforce in postal. A hope that there actually is an answer here beyond simply retiring early and hoping you get some $25,000 as you kiss your job goodbye. So I just want us to reflect on, is this a new possibility? Is it a possibility of getting some kind of concerted action on what there is of the labor left, of Occupy, of rank and file movement within the postal workers? Question.
Any responses from the panel? Overlap of Wisconsin, Occupy, Smart Campaign?
I think we all agree.
All agree? Okay. That's where at the left forum. You're on the list, Dan. The sister here is next.
Yeah, actually, I was speaking with Zweig yesterday when we were discussing the national campaign for.
Speak up.
Yeah, you got to stand up or talk loud.
My name's Cindy. I'm from local 153 OPBIU, and I'm part of the Labor Outreach Committee of Occupy Wall Street here in New York City. And we have been discussing the postal workers and the possibility of a national campaign within that committee. My question, I really kind of had a question for the panel about, one of the frustrations that's been with the Labor Outreach Committee is the call for a general strike here, nationally, and the fact that we've been, know our consciousness of our workers and our shops are not, it's not even about the leadership standing in the way. It's about, the rank and file's not there yet. They're not even close to where they were in Wisconsin, for the most part. Even though New York City has like 30% of the workers in New York City are probably in a public or private union, here we're nowhere near being able to bring about general strike. And I guess my question for the panel is, what are the next steps? I mean, what are the steps that we need to be taking? Because we're a small core of people right now, and we're reaching out, but there's not enough of us yet. I mean, like, what should we be doing, not just in our local shops, but in committees like the Labor Outreach Committee, to start to build that kind of grassroots, like organizing within the unions, to be able to, at some point down the road, actually be able to call a strike that could shut down a city in the United States.
Michael?
When I was in high school, I read this poem by E.E. Cummings. It's one of my favorite lines of all time. Is this line in there is some shit I will not eat. Now, the operative word there is some.
That's right.
So, you never know. That's as part of the question here was, all these things were unexpected. I think Travis was saying that. You never know. But what I think we can do is within our own unions, within our own workplaces, within our own communities, we can talk about what is going on in such a way that when something does jump off, or when there is some outrage, which is the straw that breaks the camel's back, that people have already some preparation for what that means, what that carries, and what that calls upon us to do. I don't think there's anything else to do. You cannot suck a movement like this out of your thumb. You cannot make it happen by saying, we should go out and make it happen. Let's have a general strike, or let's have a mass mobilization when it isn't there. Because you can't tell when it's going to be there. But you can make preparations, not talking to people about, oh, this is a revolutionary moment, but exactly the kind of stuff that we're talking about here. To bring the experiences of Wisconsin, to bring the experiences of the labor movement and the civil rights movement and other places where we have some knowledge about how this works, and try to get people to do whatever it is that they can do to build a stewards network, to build a community phone tree, or whatever it takes. I don't think there's any other thing to do but that, and there's no substitute for face-to-face work in that regard.
Very good response. Brother here, Lou.
Yeah, Sam Weinstein, utility workers.
Speak up.
Sam Weinstein, utility workers. I was one of the people that actually slept in at the Capitol for several days in the middle, and I want to differ a little bit with folks, because I don't think that the AFL misunderstood what was happening or made a mistake. I think they went out of their way to sabotage it. It was intentional from a whole number of points of view. And the first thing I would note is that in the middle of what was going on in Wisconsin, they planned to have an AFL Executive Council meeting, and they planned to have it in Disney World, right? And because one or two of the presidents complained and said we should be in Wisconsin, they moved it to Washington, D.C. Now, make out some logic of that. But you can go through it. When you were when you were in the Capitol, the AFL was 2 or 3 blocks away in a hotel. That's where their headquarters was. It was not in the Capitol. A number of students mainly were holding that, some of the TAs and so on, but there were very few union people that were actually in the building, and that was because the AFL had no interest in union people being in the building, particularly, other than marching through as a way of showing something or other, right? In terms of international solidarity, 9 Canadians, 2 national presidents of Canadian unions came down for the February 27th demonstration. They were not allowed to speak. They were not allowed to speak because the AFL said that its polling showed that nobody wanted outsiders. As one of the people who was giving out leaflets saying that the Canadians here were there, right, and that they really wanted to be part of this and so on, every single person I gave a leaflet to thanked me and thanked them. The polling was garbage. Trumka, who was the perfect person in a certain sense to be in charge of this thing, he was the person who bet the union in Pittston. He knew what it was about to bet the union, right? Trumka put nobody of importance in Wisconsin to run the thing. He let the local people run it. That was a statement in itself. He has very talented people, and all of that in Washington, D.C. and a whole set of other places. Clearly, the thing to do, and you know, yes, it was important to shut down the workplace, and it was incredible that the teachers did that, but I always came back, and this is what I argued with the students inside the building, because there was an argument that was going on about whether to vacate when the cops were making life difficult and so on. And I said, listen, in Egypt, they held on to a piece of territory, a piece of square, and the state fell around them. You have the actual seat of government. Hold on to it, right? That was clear to anybody who had a brain that that was what needed to be done. I went to the AFL and I asked them, and come over, encourage these people, bring people in, make this the center. The state will fall around this too, right? They wanted to hear nothing of it. And so that's part of the, I mean, that we accomplished as much as we did in Wisconsin is because there was a Wisconsin uprising, not but just by union members, surely by union members, but by the population as a whole. And people took a whole plane load of people from California. We could have invited people from all over the country and all over the world. Yes, we got pizza from Egypt. It was coming out of our ears in the end, pizza. We got pizza from 50 countries and from every single state in the union, right? It was incredible, right? This was the chance to invite the world in and to win. We threw it away.
Thank you, Sam. Let's have some responses to that. Now, as you know, there's some backsliding at the top of the AFL-CIO. They were back in Orlando last week.
We're in Disneyland.
Disneyland. Okay, I've got 2 people on the list. One is a contributor to the book who kindly gave up his time at the beginning, Brother Dan LaBotz, not seeing a female hand, where you've been alternating men and women. Going once, going twice. Okay, Brother LaBotz is next on the list.
Yeah, I think that what you just said and what Lee said earlier about what made this experience was that it broke out of the stranglehold of the union bureaucracy and it just became workers. It became workers. And it broke out, even out of the whole sense that, you know, we've had this very, you know, narrow notion. The labor movement was going, we are the 7%, you know? I mean, this was a vision that said, we are the workers, we're the working class, we're much bigger. You know, all those people, those workers and their friends. And it had tokens, I mean, of course, it was men and women, but it also had tokens of African-American participation of people come up from Milwaukee. It was only a token, it was a good beginning. There was a token of participation by the immigrant movement, and that was very important. And so I think that this was quite tremendous, this sense of a new dynamic, a new sense of the working class, which inspired the Occupy idea, that we are the 99%. I saw it, say, one anarchist group, I think it's called the Black Orchid, had an interesting article where they said, Well, you know, we want to speak for the 89% of the 99%, those people who aren't in labor unions, you know, and that's a very important concept as well, that we're the 99%, but we also want to speak for workers in general. I think the stumbling block, obviously, was that this movement came up against the stumbling block of political action. And I think the two stumbling blocks are mentioned. Taking this into the plants had industrial action, and also the stumbling block of political action. In industrial action, I'd just like to raise an idea of the Occupy mentality coming into the workplace, taking a hint from an old friend, Stan Weir. And Stan used to talk about that you have no rights in the workplace. You enter the workplace, all your constitutional rights evaporate. What if we were to start to take the Occupy idea and say, we want the freedom of speech at work. We want the right to tell the boss, you're wrong. No, we disagree. Well, you're an asshole, whatever it is. But we want the right to speak at work and tell the truth to the boss. We want the right to assemble at work. We want the right to freedom of speech at work, to hand out literature, any place we want at work. I think taking these basic, because the Constitution is very big in the Occupy movement, constitutionality, democratic rights. Let's talk about that. It's not going to happen because we talk about it. But if you don't talk about it, it never happens. That is, we can begin to lay the basis for this idea that we want freedom in the workplace. Freedom in the workplace to talk, to write, to speak, to organize, and to make our own plans about the workplace. Raise the idea. We have a great tradition in the socialist movement, in the workers' movement, of the idea of workers' control in the workplace, of workers running the factory, the notion of we're the ones that do the work, we know how to do the work, we can make it happen. We should make those ideas that come into this movement. The whole idea of democracy in the workplace, workers' power, workers' control in the workplace. Those are very essential ideas that we have to publicize and we have to talk about. And they have to be in a way that ordinary people react to. Yeah, I don't have my democratic rights when I work in the workplace. What the hell's happening? On the political front, I think we have to have the creativity, the open-mindedness, the wonderful first panel of Occupy strategy with some of those young 20-somethings and 30-somethings who made Occupy happen here, to say what, we need to have the political creativity in thinking about independent political action. Perhaps the next time we occupy a state capital would be to carry out all those people in those chairs. Take them out of those state capitals, symbolically saying we want a different bunch of people in here. But we also have to think about the kind of government we have, the kind of parties we have are not made to represent us. And we have to think about what would it mean for working people really to have a sense of their own power and political organization. I think that's a big imaginative project with some historical experiences. But I think we ought to particularly take these Occupy ideas of democracy and power and begin to publicize them and talk to people about them in common, ordinary English, so that people begin to get the notion, yes, I should be able to tell the boss what I think. I should be able to talk to everyone, my fellow workers, my community, about what we produce, how we produce it, is it right or wrong, what kind of a society, what kind of stuff are we making, what kind of society are we making. We need to make a different kind of society.
Okay, before we hear from the next person on our list, thank you, Dan. A very important person has joined us, Brother Martin Patio from Monthly Review Press. Has come up from their table, and guess what?
What do you have with you?
I happen to have some books. What a coincidence, huh?
So,
how much?
$15. $15 a copy.
$15. This is a monthly review discount. This is unprecedented.
Bargain at any price, we think.
A special benefit of coming to this session. So, Brother Martin, we happen to take your cash, check me out, the Monthly Review Press, at your very own Wisconsin Uprising.
That would include our signatures.
Autographed by multiple authors.
Yeah, right.
Brother, right here.
For only $1 a signature to go to the movie.
You're next.
Well, I was just going to ask about the fact that when I was trying to read Act 10, which is very difficult, I'm still not very good at reading bills, but I'm trying. It made the concessions that it strips most of the collective bargaining rights, of which you can't have collective bargaining of wages higher than inflation. I think I know what that means, but I'm not entirely comfortable with it, with the definition. So if anybody from the panel would like to just...
Well, I know what it says. What it says is basically this, that all collective bargaining, everything else, health and safety and whatnot, is no longer covered by collective bargaining. So there's a negative aspect of the bill. The positive aspect, so to speak, is that wages can still be negotiated, but only within the band of the cost of living index. So if the cost of living index says that there's a 2% increase in the cost of living, then the only thing the union can talk about is how much, if any, of that 2% they're going to get. Okay? And the second part of that is that in order to do that, the union has to be recertified each year, which requires a majority, not of those voting, but a majority of everybody who works in that union, which is a much higher standard to achieve. Some unions did that still have collective bargaining because of the extension of contracts. Those unions that generally did not have that extension have not been successful. Actually, OPIU over there was an exception, very interesting. But by and large, that's what happens. So health and safety, all that stuff is finished. Grievance procedure is finished. And what's happening is that employers are giving out employee handbooks and saying, this is what we're going to live with here, and there's no grievance procedure. That's what's enacted.
Thank you. Okay, anybody we haven't heard from yet? A left forum session with 10 minutes to go and no more questions. There we go. A new list has just been created.
You got a woman back there.
Yes, we're going to start with the sister here, and then we have a hand here, and a hand here, and a hand here. And then, Sam, do you want to? Okay, we're going to have back-to-back women. No, oh boy, look at this. 10 minutes to go. Okay, we'll start with the sister here, then Sam, and then we'll go around the guys.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Dubna. I'm a community activist from Washington Heights. So I've been hearing a lot of really interesting things from progressive members of the trade union movement. And seems there's a lot of people all around the country who are on the same page with where we should be. And my question is, so how are you going to get this together? Everybody's sitting around waiting, you know, for lefty, sort of. I went to a session. I went to a session the other day where there was a very good discussion about. Elaine Bernard was there. I thought she was great, talking about you know, the formation of a democratic socialist party, which has been discussed now at left forums I've heard for years. I mean, and so my question to all of you folks as left trade unionists is there anything happening on that?
Well, Steve gave a speech about that yesterday.
That was yesterday. This is today. Different panel. You want to respond to that? And then
Well, let me just say that on the what's happening to build a party of whatever stripe, there's a lot of different people talking about it. I don't think there's anything really that has much of an immediate future going on in that regard. But in the labor movement, there's a lot of activity going on around these budget issues, the war spending, and the development of new priorities. There is really quite a lot of that work going on. It doesn't rise to the level of transformative work in the society yet, but there is stuff that is actually happening. And this afternoon, at 3, in E328, Building a Movement for New Priorities, no to militarization and yes to social needs, much more of that is going to be discussed.
Can I respond to what Steve said?
What's that?
Just wanted to say what you said yesterday.
If you can
30
say
seconds. Structure and program. We have to have a fight for democracy, so you have the right to strike over grievances. That kind of fight in each union, where we say we are going to mobilize our own people, whether it's over the lighting or the toilet or whatever it is, and begin to say that unions represent our people. That's what's going to come from the rank and file. What we need, of course, is more coordination. But if we go in with that idea, we're much more likely to be able to build the kind of unions that will result in what you're talking about. And I don't think that's hard. It's hard work. But it's up to us to do it. That's what lefties are for in unions.
John, do you have something on that
Yeah.
last question? Or?
Yeah, that question.
Okay, that last question, then Sam, and then we're going to get back to the list. We're running out of
Well,
time.
I think if we look at the example of Latin America, where you've had successful, left-wing governments get elected, like in Bolivia and Venezuela, what happened first was huge mass movements. In Venezuela, you had the Carrasco, the Uprising. In Bolivia, you had the water war, and that threw up and gave impetus to success in the electoral field. We're starting to see that, I think. I mean, the fact that the AFL-CIO feels it necessary to have a separate meeting ahead of the Democratic Convention is a little straw in the wind, you know, of how bad the situation is and the impetus that's starting to be created by things like Wisconsin. We're not there yet. This is the United States. This is not, you know, Venezuela or whatever, but the mass movement comes first and electoral politics trail behind. I think that's a general political rule.
Okay, Sam.
I wonder, I'm asking the panelists this, so the AFL-CIO has been mentioned a few times now, and it seems like there's this transparent thing that's happening with them having dropped the ball or botched something or thwarted something. Is this a true statement? Okay, so then if we can agree on that, then what does that mean that they have such a huge membership, and that if we're talking about labor and we're talking about unions, what does it mean that one of the largest ones is not doing the job that we would like to see? I mean, maybe John just answered it, but
That's who they answered to.
yeah.
So they didn't answer it to the rank and file in Wisconsin, they answered the Democratic Party in Wisconsin. The note, right, the AFL-CIO and Wisconsin AFL-CIO in particular is an adjunct to the Democratic Party. That was the problem in Wisconsin. That's what Sam was getting to, I think. And I think that's the problem we face.
So it's the problem we face, and then, so what is the solution? Do we know that?
Well, I mean, it's got to be an independent rank and file organization. We have to try to get something going. I mean, the anecdote I had to illustrate that was that I was at the Marshall's meeting, totally no press allowed, but I was there for the Wednesday morning when it was clear that there was going to be a teach-in and we're going to have a Newtown rally and march in and try to hold it and get and try and block the legislation from happening. And a woman raised her hand and said, well, if they ran this thing through, the mood of the crowd is going to change real quick. What are we supposed to do then? And the guy said, and then we get out of the way. So that's, I think that's the best we can hope. Leadership, right? They get out of the way. And you know, after Sunday the 26th, they had this idea of walk around negotiate. Because Wisconsin public relations were one of the highest developed labor management partnerships in the public sector anywhere in the country. It was a marquee thing. They wanted that back. When they didn't get that, they didn't know what to do. They turned off the sound system and left. So on March 1, budget day, everybody shows up at Capitol expecting their demonstration. It's just the grad students with their loudspeaker. And you know, and I opened the chapter with the anecdote about how the iron workers led a charge to try to bust in. I mean, that was that was a day of that raised me like, who were the leaders? And you could see where people wanted to go. They wanted to take it further. But they were just meeting each other for the first time. They're not getting organized. And some of that was left in the networks, and that's what we could build.
Okay, we have 4 more people who'd like to speak. We're going to hold off final comments from the panel until all of them get to speak very quickly, hopefully. The brother to the left of Dan, and the brother behind Dan, the brother in the back, and Tom Gogan.
Yeah, Fran Shore from Wayne State University. Just really quickly, people, I think, who were following what was going on in Wisconsin heard these little glimmerings about the possibility of organizing a general strike. And there were actually, I heard some people sent out to, or tried to get some French labor folks come in, talk to them, how you organize a general strike. What happened to that dynamic? At what point who were the people there thinking about that, and what happened to sort of stifle that?
Okay, let's, hold that question for 5 minutes. Yes, yours? No, you got that? You should get a round of applause. That does not happen. Do not give up their time. Brother in back.
I can actually shed a slight amount of light maybe on that question. Because my name's Robert Hughes, and I'm from Chicago. And I'm going to kind of echo what the brother over here had to say about the AFL-CIO, but talk about, tactics, stuff that's going on the ground. I showed up there, I remember on Saturday. This was the big day, right? When it was this is the day when it made the national news with 150,000 people marching around. There was approximately 25 people. We had 30,000 leaflets calling for a general strike. This was dispersed among a group of people who in turn were dispersing it to individuals, and other people were taking handfuls. I mean, 30,000 leaflets calling for a general strike were put out in the street that day, and of course we all know what happened. Absolutely nothing. I mean, we wind up with this electoral sham, the idea of a recall. I mean, from my point of view, this is just diversion, whether that's one or not, I don't know. But the point I'm trying to make about all of this is my feeling was that the temperature there of the body, if you will, they were ready. I mean, I handed out 1,000 leaflets, at least. And of that number, I might have had 3 people say, I don't want that. You know, it was right on, brother, let's go, what do we do now? You know, that was where Wisconsin was at. They were ready to go. It didn't happen.
Okay, Tom, go in, batting cleanup before we get to the woulda, coulda, shoulda of the general strike in Wisconsin a year ago.
Well, the speakers have been eloquent on how there's no democracy in the workplace and we get a bill of rank and file power on the job. And they've also pointed out there really has been no democracy in the state of Wisconsin in terms of the mass movement is completely ignored by the political powers that be. So my question is, why are we posing an either or on the electoral versus the rank and file? Why aren't both possible? Is it just a matter of resources or is it something else that I'm missing?
Very good question. Okay, final thoughts.
It's not a question of either or, it's a question of both, as I was trying to say. It's an ideological question. If the leadership puts all the eggs in the recall basket and doesn't want to talk about the resources you need to build a shop steward and rank and file movement. That's a political decision that was made. In terms of the general strike business, I was at the meeting of the South Central Federation of Labor, asked to join the Education Committee to write up the material. But the position of the labor movement, after the delegate said, we want to discuss this and move towards that, it was not a call for a strike, because I can't do that, can't. The immediate response to the president was, we're not going to discuss this here. You want to set up an education committee, go do that yourselves, and go meet the other locals if you want, and you can educate them on the strike. So there was not that everybody in the Federation leadership, or even the delegates, even though they all voted for it, were prepared to go back to their local unions and ask for a strike. There wasn't one single executive board majority in any of the public sector unions that even discussed it. That was, when most did not discuss it, that was willing to even put a motion before the members, not anybody that might be around, but the members asking for direct action. And I think that also is a contradiction. You have people really upset, but on the other hand, people were not prepared on the spot to risk their job because they did not see the kind of support, leadership and whatnot, that would cause people to risk their job. And when it was posed, risk your job or do nothing, people demonstrated. But after the demonstrations petered out, really, or were overturned, to this gentleman's point, and he's right about that, what now? And it's that strategy we're talking about, and I really believe that it has to be resourced, people have to be trained, people have to know their rights and how to go beyond them, and that aspect of a two-track strategy is not being pursued.
Final thoughts from other panelists, real quick?
Well, to come back just to this money question and move the money, just to give you numbers. In New York State, right here, the people, the deficit, the budget deficit in New York last year was $8.5 billion. The people in the state of New York last year sent money to Washington in federal taxes that then went to Afghanistan and Iraq to a total of $15.5 billion. The deficit was $8.5 billion. In Wisconsin, the state deficit for a year on an annual basis is $1.7 billion. The people of Wisconsin sent money to Washington in federal taxes that went to Afghanistan and Iraq, $2.7 billion. In the state of California, they have a deficit of $26 billion. Iraq is $22. So you could basically, if you look, wipe out the budget deficits of every state in the country if you would take the money that went to wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and move them. That is a very significant thing. Now, to bridge that back to the question about where's the AFL-CIO, there was an important article, an interesting article by Alden Morris and Dan Clausen. It was in Working USA a few years ago about lessons from the civil rights movement for the labor movement. And the main point that they make was to reflect on the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, that it did not come from the established civil rights organizations. It did not come from the NAACP. It did not come from the Urban League. It did not come from the black churches, the established black churches. It came from SNCC. It came from SCLC. It came from insurgent movements within the churches and young people who were creating new forms of struggle, which then brought in its wake the established civil rights movements. And I think that the Occupy movement and labor's ability to operate within that and other insurgencies within the labor movement is what is going to happen before the AFL-CIO is brought in its wake. And the idea that we're waiting around for the AFL-CIO to give leadership is a big mistake. I don't think anybody in this room is doing that, but I do think that we don't want to say the AFL-CIO is the enemy. We just want to say we want to get our work done, and then they'll come along when they get ready to come along, and I don't think we should be calling them traitors to the class. We should just be doing our work and bringing them along in the wake.
Yeah, I think in terms of the Democrats, I don't think it's two-track. I think, look, we had NAFTA got through and strike replacement didn't under Clinton. Employee Free Choice Act never went anywhere despite the Democratic control. It's the environment is moving to the right, and it's a bipartisan project. Labor is going to have to mark down some independence. I mean, it'll get a lot more attention by withholding some money from Democrats than giving it to them. In terms of like this whole question about the idea about the general strike being popular and nothing happening, I think that's the contradiction, because people are starting to be conscious of the fact that there's this radical negative change in their lives, and so the appeal of an all-out stand is real, but they don't have any confidence. They're so relatively atomized, and they're trying to just find each other. They're trying to find each other in the street. That's why Occupy took the form that it did. Bringing that up to the point of production, which is ever more vicious, right, on a daily basis, is quite daunting. When it spills out, it's going to be big, and this atmosphere particularly. I keep your eye on Chicago. The Chicago Teachers Union is on a collision course with Rahm Emanuel, who is making this a test case for the entire operation. And when that happens, that's what we expect. Leaders to go to jail, assets to be seized, contracts imposed. You know, it's going to be the whole works, and everybody's going to be happy to be there to be in solidarity with that with money. That is where this is going to head sooner or later. And there was and on this there was a conference we had. Dan was there at Occupy Chicago Labor Committee. We had about 250 people there, and despite all the defeats, the panel was remarkably forward-looking. And there was the letter carrier's local leader, a rank and file teacher, a bus driver staff, a librarian as well. And it was one of the best. There's a sense that we're not alone. We're out of our isolation, and we're still getting beat. You know, we don't have to be beat anymore. It's not inevitable. We're going to start to come together. I think that's out there, and the left is not yet strong, big enough and systematic enough to relate to that. But through Occupy, through events like this, I think we can take a step towards that.
Okay, we got to get out of the room. We've got.
Buy the book.
Sorry. Would have gotten you on the list earlier, John.